you, Madam Secretary. All right. Good morning to all attending the RTA's virtual meeting of the Board of Directors. The Governor's emergency declaration remains in force during the current COVID-19 pandemic, and pursuant to his executive orders declaring a public health emergency and recent amendments to the Open Meetings Act, we continue to operate under the permission to conduct our meetings without the physical attendance requirements. As head of a public body, I find it is not prudent or practical to hold an in-person meeting today or to have staff or any member of the board at our headquarters during this meeting. An added feature that is now available for our board meetings is closed captioning. WebEx attendees can access the closed captioning by clicking on participants. Click on participants and then select media viewer. For those of you watching on YouTube, you simply click the CC button in the bottom right menu. So the CC button, click it if you're watching us on YouTube. Now let's review the guidelines for our meeting today. Keep your audio on mute as much as possible in order to minimize background noise, which will impede our recordings. When you have a question or comment, please raise your virtual hand and the secretary will call on board members who have raised their hands one at a time. When she calls on you, lower your hand and unmute yourself before speaking. When we get to voting, please raise your hand to make a motion or second. Audrey will identify who's making the motion and second for the record. And after she announces the motion and the second, lower all your hands. Are there any questions at this time?
I see no hands raised.
Great. Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that said, I'll now call this meeting of the Board of Directors of the Regional Transportation Authority of Northeastern Illinois to order, and I will recite the Pledge of Allegiance, which is our normal custom. Leave yourselves on mute, please. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you please take the roll?
Certainly. Director Andalcio?
I'm here.
Director Canty? Director Carey? Here. Director Colson?
Here.
Director Frega?
Here. Here.
Director Fuentes?
Here.
Director Gathing? Here. Director Groven?
Here.
Director Holt?
Here.
Director Cotel?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Melvin?
Here.
Director Pang? Was that a here? Director Pang? I didn't hear Director Pang.
We'll acknowledge her, Audrey, when she reconnects. Thanks.
I see her there. I just didn't hear her. Director Ross?
Here.
Director Sager?
Here.
Chairman Dillard?
Present. Thank you.
That's
Madam
16,
Secretary,
16 present.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for your outstanding and perfect attendance as usual. It is deeply appreciated. Item 3A is the approval of the minutes from the board meeting held on November 19th of 2020. Are there any comments or corrections? If not, I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve these minutes as they were submitted. Please remember to use your hand raising tool so that the secretary can identify who is making the motion or second. Can I have a motion and second, please?
I have identified Director Melvin as making the motion. Tell as seconding.
Great, thank you too. We'll if there's no questions or further comments, Madam Secretary, why don't you take the roll, please?
Okay, Director Andalcio,
Aye.
Director Canty, unmute, please.
Aye.
Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson,
Aye.
Director Frega,
Aye.
Director Fuentes,
Aye.
Director Gathing. Aye. Director Groven,
Aye.
Director Holt,
Aye.
Director Cotel,
Aye.
Director Lewis,
Yes.
Director Melvin,
Yes.
Director Pang, I see she's here.
Let's do this, Audrey. Hey, Director Pang, if you're an aye, give Audrey the thumbs up sign, if you would. And
Yeah,
then
raise your hand.
we'll also add you to the roll. How's that for technology?
Yeah. I'm not seeing a hand raised or any signal.
Okay.
I see her camera is on, but we're not getting even a visual where she could even just, oh, hand raised. Thank you.
Great.
13.
And she's officially added to the roll call as well for the
Yes.
record.
Director Ross,
Yes.
Director Sager,
Yes.
Chairman Dillard,
Yes.
16 ayes.
Thank you. And the minutes of November 19th, 2020 are approved. Item 4 is the public comments section of the meeting. We've asked the public to submit their comments via electronic mail. Any comments were received will now be read into the record by the board secretary. Madam Secretary, any comments?
We have no public comment received for the meeting at this time.
Great, thank you. We had, as I think all of you know, we had a number of commenters at our budget meeting, which I believe was December 9th. So we've heard from the public recently, especially on financial matters, which is great. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is the executive director's report from Leanne Redden. Good morning, Leanne. How are things in Schaumburg?
They're fine. I've got kids doing tests upstairs, or I assume they're doing their tests upstairs, and I'm doing the board meeting. So good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I guess it's season greetings for everyone. And, you know, before I get into sort of the meat of my presentation, I just want to take a moment to thank you for your commitment, your support, and your work this year, and wish you a safe and happy holiday season, and hopefully a safer, brighter 2021. So today's agenda, of course, is going to center on the vote regarding the adoption of the regional operating budget, the 2-year financial plan, and the 5-year capital program. So as you know, during the public comment period that Chairman Dillard just referenced, we held a virtual public hearing on December 3rd. Feedback submitted at that event and via the web, via email and US mail has all been provided directly to you and becomes part of the public record. And we'll touch on that a little bit more as we get to that item in the actual agenda. So we will be sort of referencing that feedback that we received. So next slide, please. I'll start with what has the potential, I'll say that cautiously, with some positive news to end 2020. It appears that Congress is close to approving a $900 billion emergency COVID relief package that a bipartisan coalition of legislators began negotiating last week. Within the bill is roughly $45 billion for transportation, $15 billion of which could provide emergency relief funding for public transportation nationwide. The bill contains a slightly crazy, maybe, but at least a complex formula that will distribute approximately 13 billion to transit agencies across the country. The very early estimates and a lot of caution and sort of caveats around that indicate that the RTA could receive approximately 450 million under the formula that they've devised, with the possibility of additional allocations that could be made available depending on funding availability. I won't get into the details. We can explain more if that all comes to fruition after the bill passes, hopefully. Currently, the bill caps the amount of funding for any one region. So sort of just to give you kind of that high level sense of what they're talking about here, they're capping the amount that any region can receive by limiting the total received under this legislation, combined and looking at this bill combined with what we received in the first CARES Act. And that cap is at 75% of the region's total 2018 operating budget. If additional money remains after those allocations are made, a region may be allocated funds above that 75% cap. Staff are on it, staff are monitoring it. We're working very closely with APTA as well as our Washington team on all of this. While the current agreement includes funding for mass transit, it does not include any assistance for state and local governments, even though earlier versions of this legislation did include state and local funding relief. It's believed that Congress will attach the proposed coronavirus relief bill to the larger $1.4 trillion FY 2021 omnibus spending bill and vote to approve the package prior to leaving Washington for the December holiday. And my caveat again, I do want to stress that while this is positive news, it is not yet finalized, and we will continue to monitor those developments and keep you apprised. And it is less than some of the original or earlier asks that we had been making from the public transportation space. So next slide. As you will hear in greater detail today, we are seeking your approval of the 2021 regional transit budget and the 5-year capital program, while acknowledging a potential operating shortfall of more than 500 million without additional COVID relief dollars. So the 21 operating budget is 3.02 billion, which is a 5% reduction of 157.4 million compared to our pre-COVID plans. The 21 through 25 capital program of $6.351 billion is 23%, or nearly $2 billion less than the previous 5-year program. The 21 portion of the 5-year program is 1.492 billion. As the pandemic has decimated ridership and farebox revenues, the CTA, Metro and Pace have been able to continue operations due to the 1.4 billion infusion from the earlier coronavirus relief and economic security, or CARES, as we've all come to refer to it, Act that passed back in March. In the 2021 through 2025 capital program, as I mentioned, is 6.351 billion. Capital programming is central to the RTA, which has been continually refining its regional planning process, building on adoption in 2018 of the Invest in Transit Strategic Regional Plan. And for increased transparency, accountability, the capital program now includes a new level of analysis from the RTA and the service boards about how each project supports the Invest in Transit goals and our core responsibilities for the 4 agencies. And there'll be more on that coming up. I'll provide some context for you as we get to that, and that's under item 7C. Next slide, please. So because of those CARES Act funds will begin to run out in the first half of 2021. The RTA and all 3 service boards have continued working with the American Public Transit Association to call on Congress to provide additional funds. We support APTA's estimate of 32 billion for transit nationwide. And these efforts reached a crescendo this week with the hashtag Save Public Transit campaign. As you heard earlier in my report, we believe that some, but not all of the needed funding may be coming soon. But rather than take a wait and see approach, we will continue planning aggressively for difficult choices that could ensue, I should say, without further relief. So next slide. The adoption of the budget completes step one in our three-step recovery strategy that we've been talking with you about for the last couple of months. The RTAs, as the system, we will use the next 6 months to plan carefully so transit can be sustained during this very difficult period. And so it can also drive the economy when people return to their workplaces in larger numbers. Next slide. So even with additional relief, we may have to amend the regional budget in 21. Therefore, step two will be a collaborative, transparent planning process to ensure that that the changes, if necessary, by mid-21 would minimize disruption, especially to the most transit-reliant riders across our region. In October, in our October memo and the information we shared with you at that time, we outlined the three-step recovery strategy. We wrote that beginning in January, we would begin presentations and discussions with you for consideration on three key areas. And they are, first, to identify immediate funding solutions. The second is sustaining critical transit services. And the final one is taking a transparent and collaborative approach as much as possible to communicating throughout this crisis with stakeholders and with the public. We'll continue on this path and shift our focus as needed. We have already begun the analysis to help guide these critical conversations. Our discussions with you and others beginning in January will remain the focus of the regional perspective, including identifying criteria for determining what critical services across the entire region need to be maintained. Also looking to provide you a roadmap for funding options available to us in the event that the federal relief does not materialize or is just simply insufficient. And then finally, that the data start sharing information and talking with you about the data needed to determine the allocation of available dollars to maintain those critical services and weather us through the rest of this pandemic. These discussions will also provide the information needed to distribute federal money when and if it does come in the most transparent and most accountable way possible. So we were encouraged to see these priorities echoed in the public comment that we received. And we look forward to continuing to work with all interested stakeholders throughout this process. So moving on to step 3 slide. Yep, that's the one. So beginning in May 21, step 3 will take a view toward 2023 and beyond. Once we've essentially kind of hopefully dealt with the immediate crisis on our doorstep. And as I've said before, this is anything but a normal budget year for our region and our transit system and virtually every other transit system across the country. So thanks to the heroic efforts of CTA, Metra and PACE workers, riders have been able to count on public transportation even during the pandemic's darkest days. Our three-step strategy is designed to sustain transit until vaccinations can put all that darkness behind us and to plan strategically for our longer-term resilience and recovery. So next slide. I want to let the board know that and the public know that the community planning program will be opening a call for projects from January 20 to February 3rd. We will again partner with CMAP's local technical assistance program for a joint application process. Our community planning program has worked on more than 200 projects since the late 90s, offering technical assistance and funding to local governments to address local planning needs that intersect with the issues of public transportation and land use. Aside from its impact on transit, the COVID-19 pandemic has strained the capacity of local governments around the region like never before. The RTA and CMAP are taking these conditions in consideration with the 21 call for projects. And the focus this year will be to provide technical assistance to municipalities of high and very high need based on data or other factors such as population, income, and tax base per capita. We'll share more details about this project selection at the January board meeting. So next slide. And just very quickly, here are the state delinquency figures for the month, or for this month. Through the end of October, the state owes the RTA $193.3 million in the combination of debt service and public transportation fund reimbursements. The state is paid up through the end of the state fiscal year, which ended June 30. So the delinquency is about 5 months behind. The year-to-date cost for us to carry that short-term debt is $4.6 million. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Leanne. Any questions or comments from the board? I just have one. With the selection of the mayor of South Bend as the new transportation secretary, our lobbyist team in Washington, D.C. Sent me a note yesterday saying that they are very pleased with that selection. They have a great relationship with the incoming secretary, including the fact that coincidentally, one of their other clients was the chairman of Mayor Buttigieg's campaign for president. So we look forward to working with the new secretary, obviously from South Bend, so Midwestern roots, and a mayor, which is good. And I believe Mayor Lightfoot also has a tremendous relationship with the incoming secretary. So that's exciting news as well. So we'll move on to item 6A, and that's an update on the activities of the RTA Transit Access Citizens Advisory Board. Michael, you want to brief the board?
Yes, thank you, Director, and good morning, all the directors. This morning, I'll provide an update on the activities of the RTA Transit Access Citizens Advisory Board, or as we call it, the RTA CAB. Normally, this update would be provided by the RTA CAB chairperson, but for today, I'll be making this presentation on behalf of our new chairwoman, Jackie Forbes. The purpose of the RTA CAB is to obtain community input on the full spectrum of programs and services offered by the RTA. The RTA CAB's bylaws require that updates of their work be made to the RTA Board of Directors on a quarterly basis. This update is for informational purposes only. The RTA CAB last met on October 5th and several topics were discussed. First, we discussed the RTA CAB's membership as several RTA CAB members' terms expired in 2020, including our now past chairman's Greg Pullman. We're very grateful for the service provided by him and for all the members who rotated off this year. We briefed the RTA CAB members on the process outlined in the RTA CAB bylaws to replace the open positions, which is important for me to share with all of you at this time because the last stage of the process is that members of the RTA Board of Directors are required to provide final approval of all new RTA CAB members. How this process works is that the RTA staff recruit candidates that we feel will best support the mission of the RTA and the projects we typically bring to this group for information or for input. All members of the RTA CAB must be individuals who work for an organization that represents the needs of people with disabilities or older adults in the part of the region that they are responsible for representing. Once staff have chosen a candidate, we recommend him or her to the RTA board member who represents the same service area of the region as the candidate. After we obtain approval from the board member or members, the candidate will be offered a position on the RTA CAB. Currently, we have openings for 6 voting members representing the City of Chicago, suburban Cook County, Kane County, Lake County, McHenry County, and Will County. At this time, staff has selected the recommended candidates for these open positions and will be seeking approval. Right after this meeting, I'll be sending out emails to all of the members of this board that will be asked to approve the recommended candidate from their area of representation. In the case of the City of Chicago spot and the suburban Cook County spot, all of the board members representing those areas, which is many of you, will be asked to approve. The email will provide you with further instructions, but I wanted to let you know that this email will be coming so that you had background and context. The next meeting of the RTA CAB is on January 25th, so we would like to have your approval of the recommended candidates by January 8th, if possible, so that we have time to onboard the new members before that January meeting. Then with the RTA CAB, we moved on, and after the membership discussion, we provided the RTA CAB with a briefing on the revised 2020 ADA paratransit operating budget that was approved by this board during the August 2020 meeting. And we presented the proposed operating and capital funding amounts for the 2021 budget and 5-year capital program. We ended the discussion by laying out the timeline and procedures for approving the 2021 budget and capital program. Then we gave an update on the progress of the ADA Paratransit Innovation Study. As a reminder, the goal of the study is to determine innovative solutions to make ADA paratransit service financially sustainable for the long term. Next, we provided an overview of the RTA scenario planning work that is underway and is being used to frame the discussion on how to prepare the region's transit system to successfully navigate the next 1 to 2 years of uncertainty brought about by the impacts of COVID-19. This scenario planning work has been presented to this board. And lastly, the RTA CAB set its meeting dates for 2021. Meetings will be held from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on January 25th, April 26th, July 26th, and October 25th. This concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to try my best to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
Great, thank you, Michael. When you send out the information on the CAB, will you include just a little bit about Jackie's background too,
Sure.
since she's going to be the new chairwoman? Any questions of Michael or suggestions, questions?
I am scrolling. I see no hands.
Thank you. It's a hopefully when the pandemic is over, we'll have more of a chance to physically be with these individuals. But they provide they put in a lot of time. They're incredibly important, very sincere, and just a critical component of our ridership. And we deeply appreciate their service, because it's a sacrifice for them to serve, and they put in a great amount of thought and time. So thank you, and Michael, pass along my thanks to them, and thanks for their service. Thank you. 6B is our next item, and that's the presentation of the quarterly performance report for the third quarter of 2020. Jill Leary, you going to brief the board on this one?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman and board members. I'm here to present the quarterly performance through the third quarter of 2020. This presentation was postponed from last month's board meeting to allow the service boards to discuss the proposed budgets at length. Next slide. As a reminder, we are using the 3 goals from Invest in Transit, our regional transit strategic plan, to structure our quarterly reports. In a moment, I'll walk through each of these goals and tell you how we performed through the third quarter of 2020. First, I do want to note that this quarterly report covers the first 3 quarters of 2020, so it includes 2.5 what we would used to call normal months and 6.5 COVID impacted months. Next slide. The first strategic goal, deliver value on our investment, focuses on 2 key questions. Did we get more funding, and are we efficient stewards of the funding that we have? Next slide. We monitored progress on this goal through September of 2020 by tracking capital and operating funding and expenditures and comparing performance to 2019. Looking at year-to-date Q3 results, annual capital funding increased by over $1 billion from 2019. This is a result of half of the Rebuild Illinois bond funds getting shifted from the out years, 2021 through 2024, to 2020. Capital expenditures increased 3% from 2019. Shifting to operating stats, the system-wide operating cost per passenger trip has been significantly higher through 2020, as ridership has decreased by 54%, although operating cost had a decrease of 1.9% decrease through the third quarter. The fare revenue per passenger trip was down 12.2% to $1.59. We don't see such a significant jump for this metric since both parts of the equation, fare revenue and ridership, trended downward in tandem. Next slide. For the first goal spotlight, I'd like to give you a more detailed look at system-wide operating cost and fare revenue per passenger trip. Until now, we have presented these results on a quarterly basis. However, by looking at them on a monthly basis, you can more easily see the impact of ridership losses due to the pandemic on these measures. While significant ridership losses impacted both metrics, the operating cost per trip shows a more dramatic increase because operating costs remain generally level whether people ride or not, whereas fare revenue and ridership decrease in tandem. We can see that over the course of the year, as ridership has improved, the operating cost per passenger trip has come down. Next slide. Moving on, the second goal of Invest in Transit is build on the strengths of our network, where we ask the questions, did the region become more transit friendly? And are we focusing our limited resources wisely? Next slide. For this goal, we have been measuring vehicle revenue miles, or the amount of service available to our riders over the past 10 years. Before the pandemic, the trend had been generally upward over the past decade. However, Metro and Pace have had reduced service plans in place since March in order to maintain operations for essential service providers, limit exposure for their frontline workers, and to reflect decreased demand on the system. Vehicle revenue miles through the third quarter of 2020 was 18% lower compared to 2019. Next slide. For the second goal spotlight, we're going to look at how our service reductions compared to our peer regions across the country. As you can see, the Chicago region kept a significant portion of its service intact, and we reduced service to a lesser extent than our peers. Compared to 2019, in 2020, CTA reduced its service miles by 8.3%, partly due to the shutdowns of CTA service during the social unrest events in early June and August, and also reflecting staff shortages that caused missed runs. Metro reduced its service miles by 29% as a significant portion of its riders had the ability to telecommute. Pace suburban services were reduced by 21.5%, affecting 100 of its routes. And ADA paratransit service miles were down 38.4%. Although share rides were eliminated to ensure the safety of ADA riders, COVID reduced the demand for trips significantly by half. I will note here that we think this, the Boston metric up here has incorrect data, so that's kind of why it looks a little bit different than everyone else. Next slide. The third goal is stay competitive, which asks, are we providing the kind of services that people want to ride, and are people satisfied with it when they do? Next slide. For this goal, we've been tracking ridership as well as metrics related to speed and reliability, which influence whether people use transit. System-wide ridership through the third quarter of the year was 189.5 million, a decrease of 54% compared to 2019. The system-wide average speed was 14.6 miles per hour, down from 14.9 miles per hour in 2019. CTA's on-time performance averaged 83.5% for bus through the third quarter of 2020. Rail stats are not available at this time. Metro's on-time performance averaged 94.2% through the third quarter of 2020, roughly equal to the 2019 performance. And Pace's average on-time performance through the second quarter was 84%, equal compared to 2019. Next slide. For this quarterly spotlight, I'd like to update you on transit ridership and movement around the region right now. I showed similar charts to you in May, and they are shown here updated through November 27th. This chart shows preliminary ridership data reported by CTA, Metra, and PACE to determine the extent to which ridership has changed compared to early March. You can see the sudden and significant drop-off of the second week of March, followed by sustained low levels of ridership, with only slight improvement for CTA and PACE bus, the blue and the green lines. Little change for CTA rail, shown in the red, and almost no change for Metra, the orange line, through November. November 27th, system-wide ridership was down 82% compared to early March. We've also been monitoring personal auto travel throughout the 6-county region using a tool called Replica. This data is shown via the black dashed line in the chart and shows the change in vehicle miles traveled. From what we've learned, regional travel did not see the same steep drop in March and recovered at a faster rate than every mode of transit ridership, sustaining those gains for the most part throughout the time period shown. When we look at these two data sets together, we see that public transit has been more significantly impacted than auto use. Next slide. And finally, here's a look at our new strategic performance measures dashboard, which went live this week on our website. The dashboard will allow for regular updating of the 8 measures that we've traditionally presented to you on a quarterly basis. Most of the measures can be updated monthly, and a few will update quarterly as data is received from our service boards. In addition to being updated more frequently, the data is displayed by month where possible, whereas the quarterly reports have always been presented on a year-to-date basis. This feature of the dashboard allows viewers to get a better feel for how these metrics change in the quickly changing environment that we've experienced this year. Right now, the dashboard contains system-wide aggregated data from our service boards, but we're looking to enhance the dashboard in the coming year to show each agency's data individually. We're excited about launching this and hope you will check it out on our website. Next slide. In summary, performance through the third quarter of 2020 shows the ongoing impacts of COVID-19. Capital work has continued, but operations have been affected, both locally and nationally. People have increased movement throughout the region, but have not returned as quickly to transit use. Rail in particular has not seen the same recovery levels as the bus system. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Joe. That launch of the new strategic performance measures dashboard is awesome. Any questions of the board, comments?
I'm checking, no hands raised.
Great. I just have one, and it'll be interesting. You know, I've always, when people look at the performance of our RTA, I always brag that we basically, you know, over a period of years have had the lowest historic operating cost per passenger mile as a way to show how efficient we are. So I'm going to watch that recovery once we get back to a more normal process pretty closely. That's just one that you know, that I've always thought spoke highly of our service boards and the RTA. It's out of whack now because of the pandemic, but it's just one that always bears watching, especially since we have tougher winters than most of the country, as well as you know, we have union labor and somewhat, although it's getting better, somewhat older equipment. But that's always a measure that I've always, for the newer board members, that operating cost per mile is usually a feather in the cap to our region and our service boards. Thanks, Joe. So on 6C, which is our next report on the monthly financial results for October of 2020, Sarah Rubino, are you going to brief the board on that one?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and directors. My name is Sarah Rubino, and I am a senior analyst here in the budget department. Today, I will cover the year-to-date financial results in October 2020. Please keep in mind that the results are being compared to the somewhat outdated August budgets of the mainline service boards. Later in today's meeting, Doug Anderson will be presenting our third budget amendment of the year, which contains revised budgets of the CTA, Metra, and PACE suburban service. If approved by the board, next month's report will compare actual results to those amended budgets, which should get rid of some of the red you'll see on today's dashboard. System ridership through October was 56.2% below prior year, but 1.1% higher than the amended budget. CTA and PACE reported favorable to budget results in excess of 3%, while Metra was unfavorable by 23.7%, highlighted in red, as October commuter rail ridership was only 10% of normal levels. ADA paratransit ridership was favorable to budget at 12.5% through October, highlighted in light blue, which is driving expense higher, as you'll see on the expense slide. Next slide, please. Total operating revenue of $897.9 million was $71.2 million, or 7.3% unfavorable to budget, and highlighted in red. Each service board, including ADA paratransit, reported unfavorable operating revenue in excess of 3% for October. Some of this unfavorable variance is due to the timing of CARES Act acquisitions. The service boards included in their operating revenue $462.2 million of CARES Act funding requisitioned for fair revenue losses, as authorized by RTA Ordinance 2020-20, the May funding amendment. Next slide, please. Next, we have the public funding result. Sales tax performance has been better than expected, which was recognized with the funding amendment adopted at the September meeting. The real estate transfer tax also outperformed the amended budget through October. However, CTA finished 0.1% unfavorable to budget due to a lag in CARES Act requests. Metra's 3.6% unfavorable variance is attributed to the repurposing of CARES Act funding to revenue recovery. We also see unfavorable results of 2.2% at PACE, again due to the timing of CARES Act requests. The ADA paratransit funding was adjusted to the level contained in the September funding amendment, beginning with October's payment to PACE, resulting in a 0 year-to-date variance. Total regional public funding through October is expected to fall short of budget by $15.4 million, or 1.2%. Next slide, please. Expenses continue to be the bright spot on our dashboard. System-wide operating expenses through October were $115.8 million, or 5% favorable to the amended budget, highlighted in light blue. Through October, CTA's expenses were less favorable to budget than those of Metra and PACE, as CTA continues to operate a full schedule. Metra and PACE are operating reduced schedules, and as a result, have significantly favorable expense variances. Importantly, this good expense performance is limiting the amount of CARES Act funding that can be requisitioned. ADA paratransit expense finished 4.2% unfavorable to budget due to the extension of COVID-19 mitigation efforts and better than expected ridership. As a result, ADA is beginning to develop an additional funding need on top of the $31.4 million of reserve funding that was approved by the board in September. Next slide, please. The system year-to-date net result was $29.2 million favorable to budget. Significant cost savings at Metra resulted in favorable net result of $13 million and $25 million, respectively. As we move toward the end of the year, the net result should show a diminishing surplus as the CARES Act requisitions are trued up. Due to ADA paratransit's unfavorable expense performance, that net result finished with an $8 million deficit. This is also saying to us that ADA may need additional funding as we near year end, and we will keep the board apprised of that situation. Next slide, please. With $462.2 million of CARES Act funding included, regional recovery ratio, shown in the right-hand section of the table, was 50.1% through October, now a half a percentage point below budget. With CARES Act funding, CTA and Metra reported slightly unfavorable recovery ratios, while PACE's finished 1.9 points favorable to budget. ADA paratransit recovery ratio fell short of budget by 1.9 points, with credits applied due to their unfavorable expense performance. On the left side of the table, you can see that in the absence of CARES Act funding, regional revenue recovery ratio, 25%. And that concludes my remarks. I'll try my best to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Any questions of Sarah on October financial results?
I'm scrolling. I see no hand.
Great. Thank you. All right, we will move on to 6D, which is a presentation of the semi-annual project management oversight, or the PMO report from Violet. Violet, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Violet Gunka, and I am the Division Manager for Project Management Oversight and Compliance. Today, I will present the current report on project management oversight. Next slide, please. RTA implements the PMO program pursuant to Section 2.01B of the RTA Act. RTA is required to oversee the Service Board's capital programs and expenditures. PMO is part of RTA's fulfillment of this requirement. The focus of the PMO program is implementation, delivery, and completion of projects. The PMO program supports the RTA's Invest in Transit strategic plan as we focus on ensuring that we are efficient stewards of the capital funding that we have. The PMO program currently includes oversight of all state-funded transit projects regardless of budget, and all other projects with budgets of $10 million or more regardless of funding source. Specific involvement includes direct reports and meetings with Service Board project teams, attendance at other project meetings, project site visits, and periodic reporting to the Illinois Department of Transportation. RTA PMO staff is augmented by engineering and project management consultants who provide necessary expertise as well as additional staff resources. Investing in and improving the transit infrastructure as well as the service is necessary to maintain our transit network. The PMO report that you have received provides an inside look and highlights the investments that the service boards are making into the system. The report details the currently ongoing projects in the region. You can easily see progress, issues, and risks for the transit capital projects. This report for the first time includes 13 of Rebuild Illinois projects that represent $655 million worth of Rebuild Illinois funding. New projects enter our PMO program after they complete the procurement process. There's a signed agreement with a contractor and project scope activities have commenced. At this time, there are many more Rebuild Illinois projects in the procurement process. Therefore, they are not yet included in the PMO report, but we will be reporting on those in the future. Next slide, please. The PMO report includes 22 ongoing projects that have over $962 million of state bond funding. The state funding more than tripled the amount previously reported in June by including the 13 Rebuild Illinois projects that I mentioned earlier. This amount also includes some funding from the prior year's programs, as the service boards are still wrapping up some older projects and using up any remaining funds. The 46 current projects with budgets of $10 million or more represented in this report show an investment of almost $5.7 billion into our system. This funding includes what's already been expanded and what is obligated for these projects. Some of these projects span over multiple years. Next slide, please. We briefly touched on the state-funded project budgets on the last slide. All of the state-funded projects are on budget. With respect to scope, there was one change order executed this reporting period for the Positive Train Control project. Most of the total change orders were for added value to the project and represent less than 1% of the total budget of all the state-funded projects. All change order justifications were reviewed and concurred on by the RTA. The scheduled performance for the state-funded projects is strong. 20 of the 22 state-funded projects are on schedule. The projects that are behind schedule are CTA's 98th Street Rail Shop Bridge Replacement and Metra's Union Pacific North Line Bridges and Ravenswood Station. The construction projects continued with work during COVID-19, implementing social distancing and other CDC recommendations at the job sites without major schedule impacts at this time. Some of the bus procurement and the rail procurement projects have experienced delays related to COVID-19 due to plant closures. However, those projects are moving forward at this time. Next slide, please. In the PMO report, we break down the projects into 3 categories, which include construction, maintenance and rehabilitation, and procurement. On this slide, you can see the graphical representation of the investments in these categories at each of the service boards. Construction includes all projects related to design or improvements to stations, bridges, and other transit facilities. The maintenance and rehabilitation includes projects like track, signal, and substation upgrades and improvements, as well as rehabilitation of rolling stock. The last category includes procurement of rolling stock and technology like cameras and PTC components. Next slide, please. As part of the RTA strategic plan process, each of the service boards identified their 10-year need to fund the priority projects. The numbers are updated on an annual basis. This slide shows how much funding is currently allocated to the active projects included in the PMO report. CTA identified a $21 billion need to complete the projects included on their priority list. CTA's current projects included in the PMO report show a $3.5 billion investment into the system. Metra identified almost $11.5 billion need to complete their priority projects. Currently, the active PMO projects represent a $1.7 billion investment into their system. Similarly, PACE identified a $1 billion need for the priority projects to be completed. The ongoing projects in the PMO report show an investment of $515 million. Please note that many of these projects span over multiple years. Project budgets include funding that is already expanded and funding that is obligated for these projects. While more funding is needed to fully fund the priority projects identified by each of the service boards, this report provides some insight on the progress being made and provides details on the currently ongoing projects. Next slide, please. On this slide, we wanted to highlight some of the new Rebuild Illinois projects. CTA has awarded a contract in October to purchase material kits for the 5000 series rail car rehabilitation project. This project will provide for the quarter-life overhaul of the 5000 series rail cars. The maintenance will include major component rebuilds and the needed repairs to the car bodies. Metra awarded a design contract for the rehabilitation of 5 stations on the electric line. The project includes the following stations: 79th Street, 87th Street, 95th Street, 103rd Street, and 111th Street. The project elements may include the replacement and/or rehabilitation of station platforms, new lighting, head house rehabilitation, replacement of leaking roofs, installation of new warming shelters, new platform amenities, and other related work. The new stations will also be fully accessible and meet ADA requirements. PACE is moving forward with the design and construction of a new Northwest Division garage in Wheeling. The new facility will replace the Northwest Division built in 1962. It will be a full-service, fully furnished and equipped, heavy-duty bus repair, maintenance, and storage garage. It will also be a fully equipped CNG facility. These are just a few highlights. Details on other Rebuild Illinois projects are included in the PMO report. Also, updates on many more projects from the service board's priority list are included in the report. Next slide, please. On this slide, we wanted to highlight state-funded projects that were completed in this reporting period. Metra completed the rolling stock rehabilitation project. 69 locomotives and 176 rail cars have completed the rehabilitation process as part of this project. PACE has purchased a total of 108 CNG buses, and PACE has also completed the relocation and improvements to the Orland Square Mall bus stop. Next slide, please. In summary, our PMO program focuses on project implementation and delivery. Our team provides detailed information on the progress of ongoing projects. The PMO work supports the goals of the strategic plan. Through this program, we work with the RTA capital team and service boards to ensure that capital funding is spent efficiently and effectively. The projects presented in the PMO report show how we deliver value on our investments, build upon the strong transit network that we have, and help us stay competitive. RTA and the service boards have been working on improving the transparency in capital investments. Providing details on the current projects in the region supports this initiative. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Great, thank you, Violet. Any questions of the from the board or comments?
I'm checking right now. I do not see any hands raised.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Violet. We'll now move on to agenda items that are for action. And the first is 7A, which is an ordinance authorizing the quarterly amendment to the 2020 to 2024 capital program. And Brian Lowenberg, are you going to brief the board on this one?
Good morning, Chairman Billard and members of the board. I'm Brian Winberg, Principal Analyst in the Capital Programming Group. We are requesting approval of one ordinance which will authorize an amendment to update the 2020 to 2024 capital program to incorporate changes in program revenues and expenses for CTA and Metra. Let me explain the changes to the capital program that we are recommending in this ordinance. This quarter, we are asking you to approve a total net funding increase to the 5-year capital program of $61.05 million that affects both current and out years. The total net increase is $59.7 million for CTA and $1.35 million for Metra. CTA's $59.7 million increase consists of a shifting of CTA bond issuances to future years that will reduce debt repayment costs by just under $66 million. An increase in federal discretionary funds amounting to $10.75 million from the Department of Homeland Security and the Volkswagen Clean Air Settlement Funds. An increase of $600,000 in CTA funding to match the Volkswagen Clean Air Settlement, and a decrease of $17.5 million in CTA bond issuances. Metra's $1.35 million increase consists of an $850,000 increase to invest in Cook County grant funds, and a $500,000 increase in City of Chicago TIF funds. The detailed project budgets and changes to the capital program are included in the memo in your board materials and in Schedules 2A and 2B to the attached ordinances. RTA staff has reviewed these requests and found them to be justified as outlined in the ordinance request memo. I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, we're seeking your approval.
Great, thank you, Brian. Any questions on this amendment?
I'm taking a look. And I do not see any hands.
Great, then I will entertain a motion and a second that we approve the report as submitted by Brian. Have a motion and a second, please.
I have Director Melvin moving and Director Ross seconding.
Great, and with that, Madam Secretary, please take the roll call.
Director Andalcio?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gathing?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis? Director Lewis?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Payne?
Here.
Director Ross?
Aye.
Director Ross, did you also have a question?
No, I'm sorry. Didn't I take my hand down?
No, okay,
Sorry.
no problem. Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Yes.
16 ayes.
Thank you. And that ordinance authorizing the quarterly amendments to the 2020 to 2024 capital program is adopted. We'll move on to 7B, which is an ordinance amending the 2020 regional and service board operating budgets. Doug Anderson, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. This morning, we're asking you to consider an ordinance amending the 2020 regional operating budget for a third time. You've probably realized by now that frequent funding amendments and budget amendments are going to be the norm as we continue to navigate through the changing financial landscape brought on by the pandemic and recovery. Next slide, please. Revised service board budgets are required after any RTA funding amendment, in this case, the September funding amendment, which increased regional funding by an estimated $199 million compared to the May funding amendment due to improved sales tax and real estate transfer tax result. The September ordinance allowed CTA, Metra, and Pace Suburban Service to meet this requirement by incorporating the revised funding levels into the 2020 financial estimates included with the proposed 2021 operating budget in October. Those updated 2020 forecasts provide the basis for this budget amendment. PACE's latest operating budget for ADA paratransit was already incorporated into the regional operating budget by the October budget. Therefore, this ordinance proposes no change to the ADA transit budget. However, as Sarah mentioned in the October financial results, ADA has begun to develop an additional funding need, which may necessitate a future budget amendment, but that's not under consideration today. Similarly, the RTA agency's 2020 operating budget was already reduced by 10% with the August budget amendment. So RTA agency revenues and expenses are also unchanged in the proposed ordinance. Next slide, please. The most significant ridership change with this amendment is Metra assuming a decrease of 10 million rides compared to the previous estimate. As you heard Mr. Dubinsky state last month, Metra now expects ridership to recover to no more than 20% of normal by the end of the year, resulting in a full year decline of about 73% from 2019. The CTA PACE Suburban Service and ADA paratransit ridership forecasts are essentially unchanged from previous estimates. And overall regional ridership of 231 million, shown on the far right, represents a decrease of nearly 60% from 2019, producing corresponding losses of fare revenue. Next slide, please. With this amendment, each mainline service board decreased their expense projections from their previous estimate. CTA reduced budgeted expenses by $29.4 million, or nearly 2%, a recognition of ongoing cost reduction efforts. Both Metra and PACE Suburban Service have included expense reductions of about 8% with this budget amendment, as they now expect to maintain reduced service levels through the end of 2020 and in fact into 2021 and perhaps beyond. As I mentioned earlier, RTA agency and ADA paratransit expense levels are unchanged with this amendment, since reductions for both were incorporated in the August and October amendments, respectively. Total proposed service board and RTA agency expenses of $2.7 billion reflect a decrease of $108.4 million, or almost 4% from the prior budget amendment. This reduction will increase the amount of CARES Act funding able to be carried forward. Next slide, please. A brief look at recovery ratios in the proposed budget. The inclusion of $623.7 million of projected CARES Act funding as operating revenue has allowed each of the service boards to achieve or exceed their RTA requirements. The projected regional recovery ratio of 50.7% is 0.1 percentage points lower than the October amendment, but still meets 50% statutory requirement. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the amount of CARES Act funding anticipated to be consumed in 2020, and in turn, the amount expected to be carried over to 2021. The proposed budgets expect to utilize $819 million of CARES Act funding. This is about $280 million less than the previous budgets expected to utilize, shown in italics, due to the improved sales tax levels of the September funding amendment and the lower service board expense levels we showed on that earlier slide. As a result, $619 million of CARES Act funding is projected to be carried into 2021, which Bill Lackman will revisit in the next agenda item. In closing, staff requests board adoption of the ordinance amending the 2020 operating budgets of the CTA, Metra, and PACE Suburban Service to produce an amended regional operating budget. If approved, we will compare to this amended budget in the dashboard for our final two service board financial results presentations of this extraordinary budget year. That concludes my presentation. I'll try my best to answer any questions you may have. Back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Doug. Any questions of Mr. Anderson from the board or comments?
I'm taking a look. Going once, going twice. I see no hands raised.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then how about a motion and a second to approve this ordinance as submitted?
I see Director Andolcio has motioned and Director Groven has seconded.
Thank you, David and Chris. With that, how about a roll call, Madam Secretary?
Director Andolcio,
Yes.
Director Canty,
Yes.
Director Carey,
Aye.
Director Colson,
Yes.
Director Frega,
Aye.
Director Fuentes,
Aye.
Director Gathing,
Yes.
Director Groven,
Aye.
Director Holt,
Yes.
Director Cotel,
Aye.
Director Lewis,
Yes.
Director Melvin,
Yes.
Director Pang, Director Pang. You need to unmute. Director Pang? Is that a yes? Director Pang? Are you in agreement on this item? Please raise your hand for a yes. Director Pang? Director Pang? Please raise your hand if you are voting yes on this item, or say yes.
We can move on, Audrey.
Okay, sorry. Director Ross?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Aye.
Director Pang, one last chance. We are going to have 15 ayes and 1 absent on this.
Great. Yeah, will be so reported. Thank you. The next action item is 7C, which is the ordinance adopting the 2021 regional and service board budgets, a big one. And Bill Lackman has this honor. Bill?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and the members of the board. As I begin my presentation, next slide, please. Okay. As I begin my presentation, I'd like to thank the RTA budget staff, Doug Anderson, Nora Buya, and Sarah Rubino, and the entire RTA capital team for their efforts on the 2021 regional budget and capital program. In addition, I'd also like to recognize the RTA communications team for revamping our processes for producing budget materials. As we've said in the past, each budget season presents a unique set of challenges, and that was certainly never truer than in 2020. Let's start with a quick recap of the 7-month process that has led us up to today's proposed budget ordinance. In May, the RTA board approved and released the 2021 budget call. Over the summer, funding levels were presented to and deliberated with the Service Board Finance team. On October 15th, the RTA board adopted the operating and capital funding amounts. The service boards each submitted their budgets and capital programs to the RTA in October. The CTA, METRAT, and PACE boards adopted their individual 2021 budgets and capital programs at their November board meeting. Next slide, please. Great. The proposed 2021 regional budget and capital program has been available for review and comment on the RTA homepage, the RTA website homepage, since November 9th. As required by the RTA Act, Leanne and Bee presented the proposed budget and capital program to each county board during November and December, finishing with Will County just a week ago today. 2 weeks ago today, on December 3rd, Chairman Dillard presided over the RTA's public budget hearing virtually via Zoom and a live stream on YouTube. Directors Canty, Carey, Colson, Gathing, Lewis, and Sager also attended virtually. 4 members of the public provided testimony at the budget hearing. In addition, we received some public input via email. All of these comments were summarized in the board memo. Topics included PACE route cancellations, track safety, the electrification of CTA and PACE buses, and satisfaction with the RTA's recovery plan for transit. These public comments are available in the board meeting section of the RTA website. Click on the public comments link under item 8, new business of this meeting agenda. We would like to express our appreciation for the many board members who participated in the county board presentations and/or the budget public hearing. Next slide, please. You're already there. Last month, you heard the Service Board Executive Directors and CFOs present and provide context for their proposed budgets and capital programs. Therefore, I will instead focus on the consolidated regional operating budget before handing the presentation over to Jill to discuss the capital program. The proposed 2021 budgets totaled $3 billion, a decrease of $157 million, or about 5%, from the 2021 expense level we had planned before COVID-19 changed almost everything. On the left side of the slide are the revenue sources assumed in the 2021 budget. At 18%, Service Board operating revenue comprises a smaller share of the total revenue than normal due to the ongoing ridership and fare revenue losses. The sales tax and PTF slices are also smaller than in previous years due to the impact of the pandemic on employment and the regional economy. These revenue shortfalls have been replaced by CARES Act funding and an assumption of additional relief funding yet to be identified, which I'll cover later. On the right side, we show operating expenses by agency. As you also heard from the service boards last month, the proposed Metra and PACE suburban service budgets continue the significant service reductions implemented in the second quarter of 2020. CTA's proposed budget assumes the continued operation of a full service schedule to allow for social distancing on buses and trains. And thus CTA's operating expenses comprise 55% of the regional expense, a slightly larger share than in previous years. The zero growth RTA agency budget that B presented last month represents 1.3% of regional expenses and is also included in the proposed ordinance for approval alongside the service board budget. Each of the service board's 2021 budget recovery ratios meets or exceeds the required level adopted by the RTA board in October. As a result, the regional recovery ratio for 2021 is budgeted at 50.7%, meeting the 50% statutory requirement. Each service board has properly included some CARES Act funding as operating revenue for the purposes of meeting its 2021 recovery ratio. Importantly, the CTA and PACE Suburban Service 2021 budgets and/or 2022-2023 financial plans also assume that some of the additional relief funding, once identified, will count as operating revenue for recovery ratio purposes. Therefore, the proposed budget ordinance includes RTA board authorization to include additional relief funding as operating revenue. This is similar to the authorization for CARES Act funding provided by the May funding amendment. The proposed service board budgets and two-year financial plans balance and meet recovery ratios by including CARES Act and additional relief funding as shown in this table. As Doug mentioned in his presentation, $819 million of CARES Act funding is expected to be consumed in 2020. The proposed 2021 budgets exhaust most of the rest, with the remainder programmed in 2022. The Service Board executive directors and CFOs mentioned in their presentations last month that all three agencies will face serious challenges without additional federal relief funding. These challenges include both large-scale service cuts and layoffs. Such measures will most seriously impact our transit-reliant customers who have continued to ride CTA, Metra, and PACE throughout the pandemic. The proposed CTA and PACE budgets and plans rely on $1.2 billion of additional relief funding, which has not yet been appropriated. If such funding fails to materialize, operating expenses will need to be reduced significantly to achieve balance with the remaining revenue. We fully realize that we are asking the board to approve what some may characterize as an unbalanced budget. To add some clarity, I would refer you to the RTA Act criteria for budget adoption. One criterion requires the budgets to achieve balance by including anticipated revenues from all sources, while another requires the budget to be based on reasonable and prudent assumptions. With respect to meeting these two criteria, we asked ourselves if it is reasonable for the service boards to anticipate additional relief funding in their budgets. We as staff believe that it is, given the recent progress in Washington towards a follow-on to the CARES Act. Accordingly, we offer the proposed budgets and financial plans as indeed balanced. Just in case, we have incorporated a backup plan in the proposed ordinance. The ordinance treats March 1st as the decision date. This date should provide enough time for Congress to act, but it is also early enough in the budget year to initiate expense reduction efforts if necessary. We strongly hope it does not come down to that because, as you heard from the Service Board leadership last month, such reductions would likely be catastrophic to our transit system. The March board agenda would include a funding amendment to update the RTA funding forecast. The service boards would then in turn be required to submit revised budgets that achieve balance without relying on additional funding relief. In the meantime, as Leanne mentioned earlier, in January, we will begin step 2 of the RTA's 3-step COVID recovery strategy. Step 2 will be a collaborative, transparent planning process to ensure that mid-2021 cuts, if necessary, will minimize disruption, especially to the most transit-reliant passengers. And with that sobering thought, I will turn things over to Jill for a look at the capital program.
Thanks, Bill, and hello again. I'm pleased to present the RTA's 2021 to 2025 capital program. For the last several years, based on the vision and goals of our strategic plan, Invest in Transit, the RTA and the service boards have been working together to articulate and advance a regional transit capital strategy. The enactment of Rebuild Illinois, the state's first large-scale transportation bill in more than 10 years, in June of 2019, provided the RTA system with $2.6 billion over 5 years in state bond funding and an estimated $227 million annually in gas tax revenue, referred to as PAYGO dollars. Throughout 2020, the RTA and the service boards have worked toward executing that capital program. The service boards continued robust construction programs despite many pandemic impacts to their operations and workforce. In 2020, about half of the Rebuild Illinois bond funds and the first $227 million were granted to the service boards, so those projects are getting started. You heard about a few of them today in today's PMO report. Those projects include ongoing capital maintenance projects and enhancements that will contribute to maintaining the system. The RTA and the service boards have also been working to increase the transparency of capital programming and the use of data to understand the impacts of the program on strategic priorities. New this year, the 5-year capital program is also presented in 3 new ways: by the core requirements the transit agencies must fulfill, by Invest in Transit's 3 strategic goals for the 5-year timeframe, and by a set of specific priority projects identified in Invest in Transit that will be advanced with additional funding. Today, I'll go through these enhancements that will be the focus of the capital presentation. Before we dive in there, a reminder that due to the continued development of performance-based programming guidelines and the discussions around the draft investment framework, the decision was made to allocate 2025 state PAYGO and federal funding in a regional set-aside pending the establishment of a new process for allocating these funds within the context of a recovery strategy in collaboration with the service boards and adopted by this board. And RTA also continues to work with the state on advocating for sustainable funds to support capital investments in the region. Last year's Rebuild Illinois bond funds and the sustainable PAYGO funding are a good start, but when Rebuild Illinois funds are drawn down, new funding sources will be needed to continue to invest in the system. Next slide. First, let's take a look at a measure we're familiar with, the 5-year capital program funding. The 5-year program includes a mix of federal, state, RTA, and local sources totaling more than $6.3 billion. Next slide. Let's examine what's new this year in the analysis. First up are the priority projects. The service boards provide updates annually to the priority projects that were initially identified in Invest in Transit. Included this year in the budget materials is more detailed information of all the current priority projects and the level of funding by project that is included in the 5-year capital program. This chart shows an example of the 3 projects with the greatest need of each service board over the next 10 years in the 5-year funded amount. The full analysis can be found in the appendix of the budget book, and later we will look at the information by service board. The big takeaway here is that 91% of funds programmed in the 5-year plan fit into one of the priority projects, with much of the remaining funding being used to administer the capital program. Next slide. We've analyzed the program based on 3 strategic goals identified in Invest in Transit. You could see them up on the screen, and you've heard me say them probably too many times already today. The plan's 3 goals describe the key areas of focus for the transit agencies through the duration of Invest in Transit and allow the RTA to show how the combined capital program contributes to these regional goals. Each project in the 5-year program has been assigned by the service boards to one of the 3 goals to demonstrate how this capital spending will assist in achieving the intended strategic investments of the region. Next slide. These next 2 charts show how the goals are reflected on a regional level. First, by number of projects. The largest number of projects in the capital program deliver value on our investment, with over 43% of projects assigned to that goal, 35% of projects advancing the goal to build on the strengths of the network, and 22% help the system stay competitive. Due to the need for more funding, the service boards are not able to advance as many projects to help the system stay competitive, as many of these enhancements are above and beyond keeping the system operating. The main focus of the capital program. Next slide. Viewing funding by strategic goal reveals starker differences across the 3 goals. 58% of funding, or $3.2 billion, has been assigned to deliver value on investment, while 24% of funding, or $1.3 billion, goes to building on the strengths of our network, and 18%, nearly $1 billion, to staying competitive. Again, service boards primarily chose projects that help to maintain the current system, which are most often categorized as delivering value on our investment, rather than advance expansions and enhancements due to the lack of capital funding. Next slide. We've also analyzed the program based on the 4 core requirements identified in Invest in Transit. Those are maintain and improve safety and reliability, achieve full accessibility, improve equity, and meet regulatory requirements. The core requirements are central to the activities of the service boards. They are noted in Invest in Transit and are non-negotiable elements of agency operations that transcend immediate areas of focus. The service boards expend capital dollars to meeting those requirements, and thus RTA is committed to addressing them through the regional capital programming process. For each project, the service boards could select up to 2 of the core requirements. More than 80% of the projects had 2 requirements selected, and you will see those in the next 2 charts. Next slide. The requirement most often identified with the proposed project is maintain and improve safety and reliability, with 168 projects fulfilling that requirement. 98 projects are expected to help meet regulatory requirements. Just 55 projects aid in meeting full accessibility, and 41 projects improve equity. With maintaining safety and reliability being a core function to keeping the system operating, most projects must meet this requirement to ensure that safe public transportation is available in the region. Next slide. Looking at these metrics by funding, $4.1 billion in funds are used on projects with the requirements of maintaining and improving safety and reliability, while between $1 and $1.7 billion in funds contribute to each of the other 3 requirements. This shows that the service boards, above all else, have focused on maintaining a safe and reliable system in the present state, compared to providing additional enhancements, which would be more achievable, again, with additional funding. Next slide. I'll run through this analysis of the capital program by service board. By funding source, here is the breakdown of CTA's $3.4 billion 5-year program. Next slide. CTA has identified 40 priority projects that help to maintain and improve the system. Shown in this chart is a portion of CTA's priority projects with the greatest need at CTA over the next 10 years. Again, the full analysis can be found in the budget book. Priority projects such as the red-purple modernization, bus and rail car overhauls, and the Blue Line Forest Park branch modernization are focused on maintaining the current system, while limited expansions include the Red Line extension. Next slide. While many CTA operational activities are geared towards staying competitive, CTA did not select any capital projects to emphasize that goal, focusing instead on projects that deliver value on investment and build on the strengths of the network. Since funding is focused on maintaining the current system, this demonstrates the greatest need for more funding of projects such as bus speed improvements, faster service via signaling improvements, and other capital improvements that can make CTA more competitive. Next slide. 21 of CTA's projects identified 2 core requirements and 19 identified 1. The most common requirement to be achieved was maintain and improve safety and reliability, with 34 projects addressing this core requirement. CTA is firmly focused on maintaining the current system. There are very limited funds available for other projects that would provide enhancements. Additionally, continuing to advocate for the federal and state funding can allow CTA to reduce its reliance on funding projects with CTA-issued debt, which requires large repayments funded from the other sources that can be used for capital projects. Next slide. Moving to Metra, here's the funding source breakdown of Metra's $1.7 billion 5-year program. Next slide. Metra has identified 10 priority projects. Most of Metra's capital priorities involve maintaining the current system through projects such as fleet modernization, track improvements, and rail station improvements. All projects are shown on this slide. Next slide. Metra selected project strategic goals from Invest in Transit for each of the projects presented in the capital program. Metra's projects were relatively spread out between the goals, with between 29 and 40% of the projects assigned to each of the goals. When looking at funding by goal, the largest portion of funding goes toward projects to stay competitive, with 54% of funds addressing this goal. Deliver value on our investment was selected for 24%, of funds and build on the strengths of the network accounted for 22%. Next slide. Metro identified 119 projects as addressing 2 core requirements, and 22 were identified as addressing 1 core requirement. The most common core requirement is maintain and improve safety and reliability, with 109 projects addressing this requirement. From a funding perspective, by core requirement, $1.5 billion of the funding is going toward projects that meet the requirement of maintaining and improving safety and reliability. One thing of note is that while 59% by number of projects help to meet regulatory requirements, the value of these projects represent just 35% of Metro's current capital program, meaning that many smaller projects that Metro is undertaking address regulatory requirements in this 5-year program. Next slide. And finally, here's PACE's 5-year capital program of $371 million by funding. Next slide. PACE has identified 20 priority projects that help to maintain and improve the system. Shown in this chart are some of the capital projects with the greatest need at PACE over the next 10 years. Priority projects such as fixed bus, paratransit vehicle, and van pool vehicle replacements are focused on maintaining the current system, while limited expansions include pulse and bus on shoulder infrastructure. Next slide. For PACE, deliver value on our investment was the requirement identified most often, with 52% of projects assigned to this goal. 27% of projects were assigned to build on the strengths of the network and 21% to stay competitive. When looking at funding by goal, deliver value on our investment continues to be the most funded goal, with 66% of funds going toward these projects, while 18% to build on the strengths of our network and 16% to stay competitive. Next slide. For PACE, the top selected requirement was maintaining and improving safety and reliability, with 24 projects addressing this requirement. From a funding by core requirement perspective, $324 million of the funding is going toward projects that maintain and improve safety and reliability, while $152 million help achieve full accessibility. Almost $58 million help to improve equity, and less than $1 million fund regulatory requirements. Next slide. To wrap the capital section up, I wanted to show this updated slide that helps us focus on the big picture of maintaining our regional transit system. Rebuild Illinois bond funds are an influx of funding that helps to maintain the useful life of the asset condition. But once these are exhausted, the percentage increases, essentially stating that more assets will be pushed to beyond their useful life. Availability of diverse funding is necessary and a necessity. Based on this trajectory, by 2035, 38% of our assets will exceed their useful lives, which is higher than projected last year and can only be improved by additional funding and sustained investment. To summarize the capital program, RTA has worked with the service boards to better articulate the needs of the region and understand what the capital program can and cannot accomplish. Moving forward, RTA will work to continue with the service boards, stakeholders, and the RTA board to continue the discussion on performance-based programming to ensure that the most critical regional projects continue to be funded so that the region can maintain and enhance the strong transit system for years to come. I'll turn this back over to Bill to wrap up the presentation.
Thank you very much, Jill. In conclusion, staff recommends board adoption of the proposed operating budget and 5-year capital program, as we've outlined in this presentation. The budget proposals and capital programs that are detailed in the ordinance balanced, based on reasonable assumptions, and meet the statutory regional recovery ratio of 50%. The proposed ordinance also provides authorization to include additional relief funding as operating revenue for the recovery ratio purpose, similar to the CARES Act funding, and contingency plan if such funding does not materialize by March 1st. This concludes our presentation. Jill and I would be happy to address any questions. Once again, back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thanks, Jill and Bill. And Bill, you get the David Letterman lookalike award with your wonderful beard that's going there now. I saw Letterman on late night TV last night, so his and yours match up. Any questions or comments from the board?
Director Colson has his hand raised. If you would lower it and unmute.
Good morning, Bill.
Yes, good morning, all. Regarding the 2021 operating budgets, if I might, as I read them, the Metra has about a $70 million deficit, which is about 10% of their budget, and the CTA has a $372 million deficit, which is about 23% of its budget. And these are big holes. So I very much appreciate Leanne and Bill's assurances that it is, in the words of the statute, reasonable and prudent now to assume that we're going to get $450 million in new federal monies. I think that's a pretty close call, but then these are extraordinary times. And I assume that we'll be revisiting this budget every month or so for a while. So I appreciate the work that's done into this, and I think these budgets, even with those deficits, are the best that we can do right now. But we're going to have to monitor the situation closely.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just jump in on that.
Yeah, please, Leanne.
Sure, and just I thanks for those comments, Director Colson, and I completely agree. And just to sort of, I guess, reiterate what Bill said, we are very, very mindful of this. Really is an unprecedented budget in an unprecedented time, and very conscious of the whole, if you will, in the budget. And Bill's comments speaking to sort of developing that contingency plan. And we have already sort of begun work on what those ranges of contingency plans might be in terms of thinking through what that data might look like, what information do we have to share with you. And we will begin that in earnest as we sort of, once we finish the approval of this budget, hopefully today, we will be pivoting and preparing for January's board meeting, which will be sort of the first part of step 2 of the recovery efforts, which will be identifying that contingency plan and what that looks like and revising, revisiting budgets. The regional budget, as well as information from each of the 3 service boards as to their specific individual operating budgets. I think you're exactly right. We will be revisiting these regularly over the coming months. But, you know, we will be looking at both how do we deal with the worst case scenario of no federal relief, but even as sort of critical, the allocation of federal dollars should they come to fruition. These will all be very real questions that will be in front of the board in the coming months, and we will begin that work with you in earnest in January.
Absolutely. We will continue to revisit this with the board.
Director Ross also has a question. If you would lower your hand and unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine is also more of an observation than a question. I've been on this board for a long time and seen a lot of budget presentations. I think this one is unprecedented in terms of the potential budget shortfall, and also because we're operating in a pandemic. But I want to compliment our staff, those who worked on the RTA agency budget as well as the regional budgets, for doing an outstanding job. And particularly on the capital presentation, the fact that we have some criteria in place now to make some value judgments about what's being done, where it's being done, how it's being done. I think that that's critically important to us moving forward. I think for new board members, you can see how critical our role is now as we try to do things that demonstrate that we are responsible in a fiduciary kind of way, while at the same time honoring what I'll call our civic responsibility to provide the best transportation available to the riders in our region. especially those that I continuously refer to as the necessity riders. So when you talk about ADA paratransit and all those people who have no other means to get to the doctor, to work, or wherever it might be, we owe them, our careful consideration and the greatest amount of transparency that we can provide as we move forward to make these decisions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, JD. Those are great comments.
Next, we have Director Groven. We have several, but next, Director Groven, you are next on the list. If you would lower your hand and unmute.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. To be honest, my peers, my fellow directors, and Leanne have done a great job of kind of summarizing what I wanted to say. First was really the fantastic job done by the RTA staff to lead us through this process and their collaboration with the service boards, because it's obviously, we sit here and look at this very clinically because we need to see a balanced budget, but obviously there's been a lot of excellent work being done, and we appreciate that. And then I guess my main point is just the criticality of shifting now and getting after step 2 of this recovery plan and making sure that as soon as possible, we've underpinned this contingency plan or this plan B, around, what are the potential service cuts, as ugly as they might be. We should at least get real clarity around what that could look like and how we would prioritize those, and then potentially alternate funding opportunities. So this is an extraordinary time. This budget, there's some unnerve here as we're approving a budget that feels like it has a massive hole in it. But the best thing I think we can do, and what we need to get to directly, is underpinning this contingency plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Audrey, who's next in the queue here?
Next up will be Director Carey.
Thank you. Again, as Director Groven said, some of our previous board members have pretty much said what I wanted to say. So I just want to repeat thanks to everybody, the service boards, the RTA staff. I think, and yes, it is technically a balanced budget. It's not like any budget, balanced budget I've ever voted on, or I'm sure any of you have ever voted on before. But we are where we are, and we're doing what we need to do. And as Director Groven said, we're going to pivot to step 2. And I really look forward. I think as hard as the work has been that's been done by the boards and thus far, I think the harder work is actually ahead, as we need to make really critical decisions. And as Director Ross said, this is, as board members, this is very important that we take seriously this next step, and I know we all do, that we keep in mind the regional that's in our name, that we keep in mind that we're looking at critical needs, who really needs to use the transportation, where do we need to put the money? Hopefully we will get the federal money, but how we allocate that's going to be a good discussion. I also look forward to development of the framework so we can figure out how we're going to, again, with the capital R in regional in mind, how we allocate the capital funds that we will get, that we have today and that we'll get in the future across the service boards. And that's really it. Again, thanks to everybody involved in getting us this far. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, very much.
Next up, we have Director Canty.
Thank you, Audrey. I won't belabor the point. I think many of my directors have said the things that I want to say, and thank you to Director Ross. I am one of those new members of this board. And I do want to thank staff and everyone that has spoken out. And I just want to reiterate to everyone, the board and the staff, as we walk into 2021 and we're looking at these unprecedented times, to maintain that same level of transparency that we have with the public in the event that we are going to have to take some further measurements or make changes and readdress these things, because I think there's a level of unease with the not knowing what the future holds, so to speak. And so I would hate for things to feel like they come out of left field if we do have to make changes to the level of service that we are able to provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Beth.
Next up, we have Director Sager.
Yes, I want to thank the other members of the board who have made very appropriate comments. And certainly I appreciate and agree with many of those things that have been said. We cannot say often enough or broadly enough thanks to our professional staff at the RTA, but also the staff at the service boards who have just done, I think, a monumental job of pulling things together. It becomes redundant and almost trite anymore to say that this is just unprecedented times, because it certainly is. But the fact of the matter is, it is just truly an uncertain time. And sometimes we can get caught in the weeds, looking at the macro perspective, looking at the micro perspective, and allowing that micro set of concerns to kind of pull us aside. I think right now we have a responsibility to look at that big picture, to make sure that we understand that we have a budget to consider. I appreciate the underlying principles that have been dramatically considered as we put this budget together, and fully intend to support it. And I think that it's been very appropriately stated that the next step is going to be if and when, and we trust and we hope that those federal dollars will come in, then we're going to have to look at the distribution as we address the more micro opportunities that are going to be available to us based upon the various needs that are out there of the ridership that we serve. And so I look forward to that. It's going to be tedious, it's going to be difficult, and sometimes it might be controversial, but I do believe that is our next major responsibility. But our responsibility right now is to support this budget, again, with tremendous respect and appreciation to all the professionals who are out there to put this together. I'm looking forward to passing this and then moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Doctor.
Okay, I believe that was our last board member, unless anybody else has a comment that we haven't missed. I believe Director Pang was looking to comment.
No, I was just going to echo what a great job that the service boards and the RTA have done to bring this together. It's not easy. It's going to get harder, I believe. And I also want to apologize that my computer keeps shutting me down like it wants to go somewhere else. I don't want to go somewhere else. It's that. But and while I'm at it, I would like to add my support for the past where I did want to support the 2020 budget amendment. I could hear you guys, but obviously you couldn't hear or see. I thought I had my everything on, but I had dropped.
I will update the count on that item to be 16 ayes.
Thank you, Sarah. All right.
Director Melvin also has his hand up now. Okay. Director Melvin?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
I just want to say I think staff just did a terrific job in both putting all this stuff together and, you know, dealing with the different cross currents and then communicating this stuff to us. You guys are good. You're always good. We kind of get so used to your being good that we sometimes don't pause and think about how much goes into it. So thank you. Thanks to the staff.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris. You became our finance chair at a very, very difficult time, and really appreciate your help in working with B and all of the financial staff at the RTA, staff in general. Anyone else?
Okay, let's take one last look. Any more comments on the 2021 budget ordinance? Okay, I see no additional hands, so Mr. Chairman, I will let you call for the motion and second.
Thank you. Just one comment of mine, and that's Jill to the entire team. It will be very interesting to see, after things get back to normal, what we use as a state of good repair number with the new Rebuild Illinois plan, and we'll see what the Congress does. But we're going to have to really focus for speaking terms what our state of good repair number is on the capital side. So with that, I'll entertain a motion and a second that we approve item 7C.
Director Carey moves. And oops, my scroller's locked. And Director Pang seconds.
Super, thank you. Thank you too. So with that, Madam Secretary, please take the roll call.
Director Andalcio?
Aye.
Director Canty?
Aye.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gadding? Yes. Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Aye.
Director Melvin? Director Pang? Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager? Chairman Dillard?
Aye.
16 ayes.
Thank you, and thank you all. So our ordinance adopting the 2021 regional and service board budgets is adopted, and as you know, we're going to come back to this again and again and again over the next few months. We'll move on to 7D, which is the expense reimbursement. Any questions or comments on it? If not, I'll take a motion and a second to approve 7D.
Director Ross moves. And seconds.
Thank you, JD and Tom. With that, Audrey, will you take a roll call on 7D?
Sure. Director Andalcio?
Yes.
Director Canty?
Yes.
Director Carey?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Aye.
Director Frega?
Aye.
Director Fuentes?
Aye.
Director Gadding?
Yes.
Director Groven?
Aye.
Director Holt?
Aye.
Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Pang? Director Ross?
Yes.
Director Sager?
Yes.
Chairman Dillard?
Aye.
16 ayes.
Thank you. And 7D is approved. Item 8 is new business. Are there any issues that we need to raise for under new business for discussion only? Any new business to come before the board?
I don't see anybody with any issues.
Okay. At least under new business.
At least under new business.
As a reminder, the next scheduled meeting date for the RTA will be next year on Thursday, January 21st, beginning at 9 a.m. We'll advise you of the virtual nature or location of this meeting as we get closer in the status of the COVID-19 crisis as is updated. Until then, I can't thank the board and the staff and especially our writers as well as the service boards for getting us through an unprecedented year unlike any other in our lifetime. I am waiting with bated breath to see what the new administration and new Congress bring us from Washington. I am so elated and thankful that apparently we have vaccines on the way, and I pray that they work without complication, and that we get back to normal as quickly as we can. And I'm also thankful that to Springfield and to Governor Pritzker that the capital plan was passed last year before the pandemic to rebuild Illinois. So I'm grateful to our friends in Springfield for that. And as Jeremy and I worry about it every day with Leanne, we're hopeful that our operations, even though it's a small amount of money, but it's critical from Springfield that our operations money continue to be solid and in the plans of Springfield, even as they go through some very, very difficult budget negotiations following the failure of the referendum on the November ballot. But again, everybody have a very, very Merry Christmas, happy holiday season, stay healthy. And again, I can't thank you enough for all of your hard, conscientious work. This is a tremendous board. We are blessed to have a tremendous world-class staff that make us look good every day of the year. So if there's no further business to come before the public session of the Board of Directors, I'll entertain a motion in a second to adjourn until next year, which will hopefully be a easier and better year.
Director Payne moves and Director Canty seconds.
Thank you, too. With that, all those in favor of adjourning say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed nay. And you can all hit that wonderful leave